Welcome back. We're almost there. Part 9, animate the dice. So we don't have to worry much about making beautiful animations, but let's have them do something when you're rolling. So whether you'd prefer to do a spin or a shake, we're going to just do a simple spin. They'll just rotate 360 degrees when they're being rolled. So to do that, let's start by defining a simple animation. So keyframes, let's call it spin. And we're going to define from 0% and then 100%. And at 0%, we're using transform. And we'll do rotate, I guess we'll do 0 degrees at the beginning, which actually I think is optional for us to specify the 0% because the default is going to be 0 degrees. And then rotate 360 degrees once we hit 100%. So however long this takes, whether it's a second or 10 seconds, it should go from 0 all the way back around, rotate all the way around once. And we can begin by just giving this to the die all the time, just to make sure the animation looks okay. So we'll do that now. Animation. I have been doing the longer individual properties in other videos. Let's do the nice shortcut. So we specify animation and then the name, which is spin, has to match this. And then after that, how long we want it to take, and then the timing function. Let's do ease. We'll try ease out. I just experiment with them. I'm not an animator. So if we refresh the page, it's kind of, it's hard to tell because it's only lasting 1 second. So let's also make it repeat. Let's add infinite at the end. Okay, so now we can see what's happening. 1 second to roll. That looks good to me. It's good enough, at least. There's some great shakes that you could find. I've seen versions of dice rolling online where it's actually like a three-dimensional shape that's being transformed, and it looks like an actual 3D die rolling, but that's a lot harder to do. This will work for us, but we definitely don't want to be doing it nonstop on all die all the time. So when do we want to do it? Well, when we click this button, we want them to spin. And then when they stop spinning, they should have new numbers on them. So to do that, we need to selectively add and remove a class, and we need to do it when this is clicked. So that's going to involve a little bit of state. And that state is going to be managed up in the game component, just like all the other state so far. All we really need is a single property. Let's call it is rolling or just rolling or animating, something like that. And at the beginning, it will be false. And then we'll update it to be true. And then after a second or something like that, we'll remove it. We'll set it back to false. And then in the die component, we'll have some logic that says, if rolling is true, add the class die rolling or something like that. So right here in roll is where we'd actually do this, where we would update the state. But I'm going to make a separate method called animate roll. And all that it's going to do is set the state, so this dot set state, and we're going to update rolling to be true. And then afterwards, we're going to pass in a callback to run. And this callback, after 1 second, we'll add a set timeout in here, and it will call this dot roll after 1 second. So 1,000 milliseconds. So this dot roll is right here. So when we call animate roll, it should set the state to be rolling true, and then call this dot roll after 1 second because our animation takes 1 second. The thing that we need to pay attention to is to make sure that we then set rolling to be false after the roll actually happens, which is in here. So after rolls left, let's just set rolling to be false. So that should stop the animation. We won't see anything just yet, except for in the React Dev Tools. Oh, well, actually, we're not even calling animate roll yet. So let's go down to our button, and instead of calling this dot roll, let's call it this, or have it call this dot animate roll. But we'll run into age-old problem around binding because we haven't bound that method. Okay, so I've now added that in. This dot animate roll equals this dot animate roll dot bind this. So now if we go to our dev tools in React, we look in the state, we can see rolling is false. When I click this button, it changes to true and then back to false. True for a second, back to false. And the values update on our dice. So now all we have to do is use that piece of state, which is called rolling, which starts as false, it goes to true for a second, and then back to false. We'll pass rolling down to the dice component. We'll set rolling to be this dot state dot rolling. So then in the dice component, we're going to pass down another thing. We'll just call it rolling again in the props, which will be this dot props dot rolling, and save. And then here, when we click, we're not going to see the animations, but there will be a second delay before things update. Now we need to make sure that we actually add that animated class selectively. So in our CSS file, I'm going to make a class called die rolling, and all it will do is add our animation. So animation, name spin, duration 1 second, timing function, we tried ease out. I think that looks fine. You can play around with different values. So whenever it has the class die rolling, it will animate for 1 second and do that spin. Now removing it is not actually going to stop the animation. As we've seen, if you add this animation on, it still only happens one time. But we need to have a way of starting that animation again later. So if it just has the die rolling class and it just stays on, then we don't have a way of triggering it again. So we remove it and then add it again, and it animates. We remove it, next time we add it, the animation happens. So now in our die.js, in here, let's pull it out of the props, so rolling, into its own variable. And then we're going to just add another class potentially. So if rolling classes plus equals die dash rolling. And we should add a space here so that if it's locked and we add the rolling class, then they're not sandwiched together. They're two separate classes, although we'll address why we don't actually need it in a moment. But let's see if it works. Okay, looks like it's working. Awesome. So the only thing that is behaving kind of odd right now is that when we first roll, they just appear. In my game component, I'm going to just call animate roll at the very beginning when the page loads. And we haven't quite seen how to do this, but there's a method called component did mount, and we're going to talk about lifecycle methods shortly. And it is called after the very first render. So only at the very beginning, after the first render happens, we're going to call this .animate roll. So small preview to where we're going with lifecycle methods. And I spelled it wrong. It's LL. I don't know what I was thinking there. So unfortunately, it's still not working. When we refresh the page, we're not seeing that animation. Any ideas what's going on? Well, what's happening is that at the very beginning of our application, if we, what's the best way to show this? Well, if we look at what the dice start as, they start as an array that we're calling with, or that we're creating with array.from. So if I quickly open up the DevTools, I don't know if this will show you, if we'll be able to see it fast enough, but over here, if we keep an eye on this and I refresh the page, nope, it's not going to work. So let's try just console.logging this.state at the very beginning. And you can see that our dice is an array of undefined. So we're rendering all these dice where the value is undefined. And so in our component, we're not displaying an icon because we're not actually getting one of these values out. So our classes are screwed up. So what we can do instead is assign our dice an initial value at the beginning so that they can animate, because we need to have one of those Font Awesome classes going so that they can animate. And what we could do, there's a couple options. We can start with an empty array here, and in our die, we could add another default prop for val and set val to default to 1, for example. And that will work. When we refresh the page, we start with 5 ones. So you could pick another value, like if you happen to prefer how 5 looks. We just need something so that they can animate. Otherwise, there's no icon. Okay, so we are getting the animation happening when the page loads, so that's good. We wanted that to happen. The other option, if you didn't want to give them a default value here, because it does sort of get out of sync with the rest of the application, even though they're immediately being updated to have new values. The other option is to go into the game, and instead of starting this as an array of undefineds right here, we could map this. There's a couple ways of doing this, but we could map this where each die, we just return 1 or 5. So now the initial value for our dice array in the state is just going to be 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. And that works as well. So either one, but I still like doing it here for val, setting it to be something like 5. You could also do random numbers. Anyway, that's just to help us have something to display at the beginning, and then it's immediately overwritten. Okay, and then we roll again. We roll again. Everything looks good, but there's one problem. Watch what happens if I try and save some of these. I freeze them or I lock them. I click roll. Those ones are still animating. So the value isn't changing. Just to show you, like this is a 1 here, this is a 2, a 3, but they still spin. I don't want that to happen. So how do I prevent that? It's pretty easy. Instead of automatically having the rolling value be true or false based off of if the animation is happening, instead, when we pass down rolling from the die or the dice component, I'm going to add a little logic to say rolling should only be true for this die if this.props.rolling is true and this individual die is not locked. So this.props.locked, but remember that locked is an array that we're passing down and it contains true and false values. So we need to access the one based off of the index, just like we have over here. So IDX. And then we need to negate that value. So rolling should be true for each individual die if the animation is happening, like the rolling is set to true in the state, and this one is not locked. If it is locked, then it should stay in place. Don't add that rolling class. So we refresh the page, get our animation. Let's lock these 3. I roll, they don't move. Exactly how it should work. And now everything looks good. They're all disabled. The button's disabled. I can't do anything. So this is what I was talking about when I said we don't actually need the space right here, because we're not going to have locked and rolling happening at the same time. So we're really only adding one or the other, locked to the end or rolling, but we're never having them occur at the same time because rolling is based off of locked when we're passing it in, and for rolling to be true, locked has to be false. And one last thing, right now, I don't like that we can actually toggle dice while they're rolling still. It's not a game breaker, but it's just not a great experience. To fix that, we can just go to our game where the roll is happening, where toggle lock is happening, and just check if this.state.rolls left is positive and this.state.rolling is not true. So now I shouldn't be able to do that anymore. Let's see. Great, I can no longer toggle them. Okay, so that's working. Alrighty. So that's most of the game logic. That's everything that I asked you to do. There's quite a bit of content here. I know it's kind of a long slog to make it through all of this. So whether you watched the videos or you just looked at the solution code, I hope you got something out of working on a slightly larger application. There are some polishing features, like adding the total score at the bottom, some minor changes, some cleaning up of the render methods, changing this button a bit. I don't like how it says 1 re-rolls. I would prefer it to say 1 roll or re-roll singular. So we can add a method to fix that. And that's pretty much it. So that will be like a wrap up, clean up video.